I met the storm before I met the lighthouse. Wind clawed at the car doors as I eased off the coastal road and into the short gravel apron that faced the sea. There was no sign that read Bracken Point Light, no glossy board with a logo or a phone number for tours, only a square iron gate with flaking white paint, and beyond it a narrow footpath of granite slabs leading to a tower that rose like a pale bone from the cliffs. The lantern room was glass and iron, an old eye that watched the Atlantic without blinking. The clouds hunkered so low that the horizon had the bruised color of a healed wound. Spray climbed the rocks and dissolved into cold rain. I pulled my scarf tighter and thought about the voice I hadn't heard for 12 days and would never hear again.
Tom used to say, "A storm is honest. It tells you right away what it wants. People, by contrast, take longer." I turned off the engine and let the silence inside the car settle. The envelope sat on the passenger seat, heavy with documents and the little brass key that had clicked in my palm since the funeral. Above the key, a tin rested like a dare. Shallow, the size of a sandwich, with the old Canar sardine fish still painted on the lid. The label he'd slapped across its face was written in his neat block letters. Tin 1. Heart. It wasn't a shock to see his handwriting. My house still carried it on sticky notes and grocery lists. What hollowed me out was the number. Tin 1. The suggestion that there were others, the hint that my husband had gone to work in some organized way, anticipating this day, anticipating that I would be where I was now, heart bruised, body still going through the motions, eyes raw and dry, and exhausted from the effort of not crying. I slid the envelope into my coat and took the tin in my hand. The brass key went in my pocket. If there was a place in the world that could hold me without breaking tonight, it was a tower built to resist weather. The gate yielded to the key. Iron hinges sang out as if happy to be useful again. I followed the granite path through a scrub of beech rose and salt-stunted spruce and reached the base of the tower. Its door faced east. Of course it did. Tom would have liked that. I stood with my hand on the latch and saw a younger version of him inside the metal. I saw the man at his workbench all those patient evenings repairing things that other people would have thrown away. A radio with a cracked solder board, a clock with a stubborn spring, my grandmother's sewing machine that sang again after years of silence. I saw the way he bent his head when he listened, as if the whole world was a signal and he was trying to tune it in.
The door opened into a narrow vestibule, then a round room where the spiral stairs began their climb. The floor was stone. The air had that clean mineral smell that always makes me think of basements in winter. The first thing I saw was the light. In addition to the diffusion of gray coming through the slit windows, a muted brightness spilled from above, where the lantern room held, like a crown, a Fresnel lens the size of a dining table. The thing looked alive, all prismatic planes and curved glass, an engineer's poem about how to bend and gather light. It made my chest hurt.
There was a chair and a small table near the base of the stairs. On the table, as if Tom had placed it there that morning, sat a portable cassette player, the kind I hadn't seen since my daughter was small, and next to it, a rectangle of cardstock with numbers written in the same calm hand. Sunset, 3.579 megahertz. Sunset again, 7.415 megahertz. If you put this in a movie, I thought, people would accuse you of lying. Then I smiled, because saying that to Tom had been a private joke. We used to call each other out when life felt better written than lived. I put Tin 1 on my lap and slid my fingers under the lid. Inside lay a cassette tape. Its label, 2 words and a date. Evelyn, start here, August 22. 12 days earlier, the day of the funeral. He had not been a dramatic man. He'd been a Coast Guard technician and later a contractor who spent long shifts in gray rooms full of equipment, coaxing stubborn systems into doing what they were supposed to do. He had never wanted an audience. And yet, here was a scene with props and instructions and an address inside my grief. Sunset, a frequency, a tape. I pressed the cassette into the player. The gears took up slack. The capstan turned. There was a soft hiss, the honest noise of magnetic tape, and then I heard his breath. Not the rasp of the last days, when everything was work. His breath as I had known it for 30 years. Hey, Evie. People assume we called each other by our legal names because we are both the sort of people who pay taxes on time and keep spare batteries in the kitchen drawer. But we had a small number of words reserved for the space where our hands touched when we passed each other in the hallway, and that was one of them. I sat with my fingers pressed to my mouth and listened to the voice that came out of the little machine.
If you're hearing this, the official part is over. I'm sorry I made it dramatic. I know you hate fuss. I wanted to talk to you without anyone else thinking the conversation was theirs. I didn't leave you a letter. It's too easy to misplace paper and too hard to hear a person when you only see their handwriting. He laughed, and it wasn't a ghost's laugh. I couldn't breathe for a second. I set my elbow on the table, put my forehead on my fist, and kept going. I bought Bracken Point for $1 and the agreement to pay for the repairs. That's the truth and the punchline. The Coast Guard likes to pretend it's a museum. The town likes to pretend it's a burden. Neither of them wanted to spend what it cost to fix the spalling at the base. The lantern room glass was cracked. The iron needed love. They had not lit her for years. They gave up the light. That made me angry. I didn't know it until I felt the anger. I found the legal mechanism, and we made the transfer. He said we, and I thought, who is we, Tom? Not me. Our daughter had been in college. He had done this while I was checking pupils with a pen light and reassuring strangers in my ambulance and frying eggs at 6 in the morning in a kitchen with a leaky faucet I loved because I had learned all its noises. We. He meant himself and the tower.
I didn't tell you because I wanted to make it not a problem. I wanted to make the light a gift and not a weight. I wasn't sure I would have the time. I wanted to protect you from that calculus. You were always the one who could explain anything to anyone. You deserved to have something mysterious. I pressed pause and sat while the wind worked the tower around me. Even my heartbeat was a noise I didn't want to hear. I took a breath. When I was a paramedic, I made people breathe by breathing with them. You can push another person's body through the simple motions. I did it now, as if someone was watching. I left a tin, this tin, he said, as if he knew the angle of my head, and I left more than one. That's not because I'm trying to turn your life into a scavenger hunt. You hate those. Don't deny it. It's because I've learned that people are good at one thing at a time and bad at all the things all at once. This is your one thing for today. If you feel like humoring a dead man, there's a small shortwave receiver in the drawer by your knee. You didn't see the drawer because you are sitting with your back to it. Reach under. I leaned back on reflex and startled at the tiny wooden drawer I had missed entirely. Of course, he would know what I'd missed. I slid it open and found a boxy radio wrapped in an old hand towel, its whip antenna folded along its top. On the towel, a hand-drawn map showed me how to walk to the lower catwalk outside at sunset and where to place the radio so that the cliff face would act as a reflector. I remembered helping him in the garage, holding a copper rod while he measured with a multimeter and explained how trees steal radio. I put the radio back gently.
Sunset, 3.579, he said. You'll hear a noise at first, then you'll hear me. I'm sorry for everything I did right and everything I did wrong. I know that doesn't fit into one apology. I trust you to know where to put each piece. The tape ended with a soft knock of leader tape. I didn't rewind. I sat there a while. Then I stood and walked the stairs. The storm hadn't reached its worst. There were breaks in the cloud where uplighting from the sea made the underside of the sky glow with a strange green. The lantern room was larger than it looked from below. The glass panes were clear and clean. The lens, that grand circle of prisms, was so perfect at light pooled in it, even though there was no lamp. Old bulbs sat in a cradle like a king's backup crowns. A small plaque on the wall named the model and year with the same fussiness you get on a battleship. Third Order Fresnel, 1897. The round, the narrow catwalk encircling the lantern room outside. I opened the hatch and stepped into the wind. It made my coat bell and my scarf try to fly. The air tasted metallic and clean, as if a new planet had just been washed. The rocks below were the same granite that underpinned half of New England. The surf threw itself against them and lost with ceremony.
Sunset came in a sift of light. A wedge of pale pink revealed itself behind a line of charcoal cloud, and the pale pink unfolded into gold. It made me think of the sheets we kept for special guests, the ones that were too nice for every day. I extended the radio antenna and set the receiver where his map suggested, then dialed with slow fingers until the numbers on the tiny LCD approximated the ones on the cardstock. At first, there was the soft snow of static. I tensed in the way you do when you know a song is about to start at a wedding. The wind went a little softer. I heard a hiss, then a tone, and then, in a voice that had room in it for the whole world, Tom spoke. If you're hearing this, Evie, I'm as proud in this moment as I was the day we held Maya for the first time. That's dramatic, yes, I hear you. Let me have it this once. I had to guess about the weather. Truth is, radio and weather are matched species. They both do what they want, but sometimes they harmonize. If the signal is clean, it means the cliff is our friend today. I need to tell you a few things that you'll want before people knock. They will knock. Some men in rain jackets will show up with very polite faces and the wrong questions. They're not Coast Guard, and they're not locals. They work for a subcontractor whose client is Orion Net Fiber. Orion Net is a real thing. You've read the articles when you scroll the news too late in bed and say, we are old and we don't need to know anything about cloud traffic. They want to run a transatlantic trunk through our piece of shoreline because it's straight and deep. If the numbers on their chart are right, the cable would land about 50 feet south of the old Bell House foundation. The Bell House is gone, but the foundation remains. Here's what matters. They will tell you that they have permits and that they can validate the old easement file. In the glove box of my truck, that I imagine Beatrice already told you how to start with a screwdriver, if she hasn't thrown it out, there is a folder that says Bracken Point, Rights of Way. In that folder, you'll find the coastal maps that the contractor submitted to the town and the ones that the state actually approved. And the two are not the same. The one they showed the town redraws a high tide line like a child guessing at a shoreline. The state map is honest. Orion Net's lawyer knows the difference. The selectman knows the difference. They are counting on you not having the patience to learn the words. I know you. You can learn anything, and you are patient when it matters.
This is not a conspiracy. This is laziness plus money. I don't want to tell you what to do. I couldn't have, even if I was alive, but I want you to know your position. The light sits on the only direct coastal access to their proposed landing that won't require heavy blasting or a public hearing that does not end in shouting. If you want to sit here forever and say no, you probably can. If you want to make them do it right, you can make them write down what right means. Either way, know that the polite men are not here for your comfort. They're here for a schedule and a bonus. He paused, as if listening for me. The wind blew steady now. My eyes stung. For a moment, the sea turned the exact color of the slate driveway at our old house in Seattle after I had hosed it down on hot days for Maya to draw chalkfish. The memory was so precise and tender that I wanted to lie down. One more thing. I'm not a saint, he said, and I laughed because that was how he always started a confession of small sins, like the time he ate the good cheese and replaced it with the kind that tastes like wet cardboard. And there is something you will find later that will make you think less of me, and then more. If it makes you angry, be angry, for exactly as long as it takes you to decide where to put that anger. If I've done my job right between here and that day, the anger will have a place to go. I love you for the kind of mind you have. Let it be your shelter when the old hurts try to take the wheel. The light is yours now. Light it when you're ready. The lamp works. The generator starts. If you turn the fuel valve, then prime twice, then press the big black button that says start. They always label the most obvious button. It's how you know who designed the machine.
There was a tone again, and the frequency fell back into ocean static. I stood outside with both hands wrapped around the little receiver, as if a stranger might take it. The sky closed down, sunset over, the first hard drops of rain like thrown seeds. I laughed myself breathless and cried until my face hurt. By the time I climbed down to the stone floor, I had made 2 decisions without admitting to myself that they were decisions. The first was that I would sleep in the lighthouse that night, even though the sheets in my house were clean and my body had been craving the lip of my own bed like a shoreline. The second was that I would not tell anyone I had the tin. Not yet. In the car, I ran my hands over the envelope again and pulled out what the lawyer had given me. The deed, transferred to my name, Tom's letter that bundled apologies and instructions, the little brass key that already smelled like the tower, and a business card from the town clerk with a note scrawled on the back. Call about easements, R.K. The initials were Rory Klein. I recognized them not because I knew the man, but because I had brains enough to read the town paper once a month. Klein was one of the smiling faces at every ribbon cutting and pancake breakfast. He was the sort of man who learned people's names the first time and never forgot them if there was any possibility the person might be useful later. A truck pulled into the gravel, big tires throwing water. The men got out with polite faces and rain jackets, just as Tom had promised. They walked with the assured caution of people who believe their paperwork is in order. One lifted his hand to knock on the iron gate as if that mattered. I watched from the dark and waited until they decided the storm was a better use of their time than me, then slipped the latch and stepped out like I'd been doing this all my life. Long ago, in a city 2,000 miles west, the job trained me to make first contact with a flat voice and open hands, to decide quickly what was theater and what was emergency. I did it now. "You'll want to go back to your trucks," I said. "This is a bad place to stand if you don't know the weather." "We're fine," the tallest one said, in the tone of a man whose life had taught him that people always say yes if you sound sure you are entitled. "We're here on a preliminary site inspection. Mrs. Hart?" "Mrs. Hart isn't here," I said. "Evelyn is."
He smiled a rearranged version of the same smile. "Evelyn, then. We had you on our list." "Who is we?" I asked.
"Cranmore Atlantic," he said, tapping his jacket. The logo was a white line under a blue wave. "We handle coastal interface for OrionNet. You should handle it when it's not trying to kill you." I nodded at the slick black rocks. "Who sent you tonight?" He held out a laminated badge just far enough that I could see it and no farther. "Do you mind if we get a look at the base and the lower catwalk?" "I do." "You're on public land down here," he said. "The easement is not where you're standing," I said, because I had guessed that much even without the glove box folder. "Also, if you slip off that ledge, I am not going down there to haul you up the old way. I am too old for heroics, and you are too heavy for me to be polite in the attempt. Another day, not tonight." He looked at the sea, where a wave paused as if considering the conversation, then hurled itself into the rocks with a slap that came up through our boots. "We'll circle back," he said, his tone even. "If you have questions, call the number on our card." He handed me a card. It was heavy, thick stock, and engraved. The name under the logo read Rhodes, Site Lead. I put it in my pocket with the tin label facing it like a talisman. Back in the tower, I dragged the old cot away from the wall, peeled back the gray wool blankets, and made a nest in the corner near the base of the stairs. The rain had the deep, orderly sound of rain that knows how to do its job for hours. Wind rattled the windows and stopped and rattled again. I closed my eyes to the sound of a far fog bell that probably wasn't really sounding. The sleep that came was good, straight down like a stone into a clear pool. I woke to someone knocking. For a second, I thought it was a dream from those last days. Nurses entering without malice at 3 a.m., the hospital trying to keep its promise to never let a person hang alone between breaths. Then I heard the voice and the rattle of umbrella spokes and knew this was the variety of interruption that wears cologne. "Mrs. Hart," the voice sounded like a news anchor who had decided to go into law. "Mrs. Hart, hello, I'm sorry to interrupt so early." I pulled on my coat and opened the door. The man on the step had gray hair combed back in a way that made me think of a picture from a high school yearbook 40 years ago. He wore a dark raincoat and a bright scarf, and he smiled as if he had been practicing on the drive over. "Rory Klein, Select Board." He offered his hand without leaning into it. It's a trick that gives the other person the sensation of control. He'd used it often. His arm had the easy position of muscle memory. "This is a courtesy visit. First, my condolences. I knew Tom slightly. Marvelous with the radios. We used him for the 4th of July back when..." He trailed off and tucked his chin, as if good manners had gotten the best of his appetite. "I'm sure you're navigating enough. I'll be quick. I just wanted to sit down later when you've had a moment and talk through the lighthouse. You've been briefed on the easements?" "The storm briefed me last night," I said. He brightened, misreading me. "Yes, a doozy. I drove out to the salt marsh after supper, the way my grandfather used to do. I may have risked a little too much bravado in the pickup. Don't tell my wife. She thinks I'm a sensible man." He told stories with harmless details that invited you to be companionable. I recognized the technique and still liked it. People who are good at this are good at it because they remember that most of us want to like a person who acts like he likes us first. I stepped aside and let him into the round room. He looked respectfully up at the lens and made a soft, appreciative noise. The admiration may have been real. That's the thing about politics done right. It isn't always fake. "I did get your card. Your note was on the back." "Excellent," he said, and slid one hand into his coat pocket, a motion that telegraphed relaxation. "We want to make this easy on you. There's a lot of emotion in town about the light, as you can imagine, and the best thing is to talk ahead of any rumor. Men in rain jackets came last night, I said. They wanted to walk the base. Well, he said, and did a small, almost imperceptible shrug, as if to deflect any suggestion of his involvement without directly denying it. I know the Orion Net schedule. They're eager. We'd be fools not to pay attention to that kind of investment. What does the town get? I asked. Jobs, he said promptly. Stability, a shot at keeping our kids from leaving for Boston or Seattle or somewhere else that smells like ambition. He smiled. I say that with love. I know you spent decades in Seattle. I always admired it from a respectful distance. I spent decades getting people to the hospital before they died. The city made itself the background music. Public access improvements, he continued, smoothing the conversation as if it were a wrinkle in a tablecloth. A new stormwater runoff system. We would codify shoreline protections. I'd like to walk you through the proposal. It will hopefully put your mind at ease. Will you walk me through why the easement line on the town map doesn't match the state's? I asked. I have both. It's like those spots in bad paint when the primer shows through. I can see which layer was supposed to be on top. His lashes flickered. He wasn't surprised I had the maps. He was surprised I knew what I was looking at. His smile reappeared, thinner. I am certain that whatever you are seeing can be explained by different resolutions and a pen that wants more water than it deserves, I said. Don't make me win in a way that makes you lose more than you needed to. He examined my face in that quiet way men who make careers in small towns have of measuring the depth of the person in front of them, like sounding a channel with a lead line. Drop the weight, see how long it takes to hit bottom. We'll schedule a chat when the storm passes, he said. You've had enough strangers inside this place for 1 week. Agreed, I said, and let him go with his umbrella. When the door closed, I put both hands on the cool stone and squeezed my eyes shut. I didn't like the way adrenaline made old injuries wake under my ribs, as if I'd run up too many flights of stairs with a patient who insisted on bringing his oxygen. I needed information. I needed a friend who wasn't invested in any of the outcomes except the one where we told the truth to our own faces. I scrolled my phone and found the last message from Dana Ortiz, who had once run into my ambulance in the parking lot of the grocery store and had recognized me by the posture of my shoulders and promised to take me to lunch if I ever wanted to talk about geriatrics and climate maps. She worked for NOAA. She wore her hair in a bun so tight it made me want to rub the back of my own head sympathetically. I sent her a message that said, in the tone I used to take when I was calling a specialist from a rural ER in the middle of the night, got a situation at Bracken Point. Can you come by later? I will make coffee that would impress your mother. Her typing bubble appeared so fast I laughed. Say no more. Give me 2 hours. Bring your appetite. I have muffins from B. Moore. She said to tell you she was waiting for you to show up at the lighthouse like a sensible woman. Beatrice Moore was the widow of the last official keeper who had lived on the point. She had a way of shaking your hand as if she were assessing whether you would embarrass her at a church dinner. I liked her because she told the truth with looks. Before Dana arrived, I went looking for Tom in the way that you do when you know you won't find a person and still hope you can surprise yourself. I opened the small cupboards under the stairs that had stored oil cans and spare wicks a century ago and found folders and a small metal box with a marine radio sticker on it. I found an envelope with old license cards, Tom's Ham call sign printed in big friendly letters that made me feel like a child in a library. I found a folded map with 3 tiny red dots placed along the coastline and a note in the corner. The honest tide. I sat cross-legged on the cold floor and thought of the months he must have spent making his ghost an engineer. Dana came with muffins and wind in her hair and made herself at home with the ease of a person who is good at not making a person like me feel shepherded. "You're pale," she said. "Are you eating?" "Yes," I said defensively, because we tell the truth to the people who just said they won't be offended by it. And also no. It's hard to remember to put the food in my mouth, and then chewing feels like something I forgot how to do. She handed me coffee and a blueberry muffin and made me sit in the chair while she told me about her morning at the weather office. When I used to run trauma codes, we would narrate every action so that we made the room a series of simple sentences. I am opening the airway. You are giving the epinephrine. We are breathing in a way that makes other breathing possible. Dana told stories with the same structure. She made the storm humane. I ate half a muffin and felt as if my cells were applauding. "Orion Net," she said, when the coffee burned good in our throats, "isn't lying about schedules. They are moving fast. The rumor about the cable's landing here has been around for 3 months. The town paper didn't print it because Klein convinced them it would spook people for no good reason. He's big on public calm. I like public calm. It just doesn't change the tides." "Why here?" I asked. "They could land south and drag it up. People do hard things for money all the time." She pointed at the map. "Depth, bedrock, orientation to transatlantic currents. You have an old bell foundation and an uncommonly straight shot to the right-of-way inland. Also, they like to land near existing infrastructure. Even old, a lighthouse has lines. The old generator room helps. So does that service road only lunatics and teenagers use." I showed her the state map and the town map. Her eyes narrowed and she made a low sound between her teeth. "The high water mark is a federal matter," she said. "People pretend it's a local squabble. When someone draws a new line with a Sharpie on an old photocopy, they're either lazy or they hope no one will check. Please tell me you will let me take pictures of this." "You can take the originals," I said. "I have the copies. Tom put them in order with more care than I gave to our last taxes." "He was a good man," she said simply. "I made him angry once a day for 30 years, and he made my life more gentle by orders of magnitude. Both of those can be true at once." "Caleb called me," a voice said from the doorway. I turned and saw my daughter, hair up in a messy bun that made me smile because she always swore she'd never do the things that I did when I needed my hands free. She held herself with that fragile indignation that belongs to young adults who have been asked to square too many truths too quickly. She set her bag down and leaned so that her shoulder touched the stone. Tom had 3 dimensions in my chest again, and the grief was unreasonable and alive. "Who is Caleb?" Dana asked softly. "My half-brother," Maya said, and my heart did something I did not authorize. "Tom's stepson from before. He called me yesterday. He said he learned about the funeral late and that he wanted to talk to me about Dad's, about Tom's lighthouse. He said he thought you might go all bunker on this and he wanted to help you see the opportunities." "He used that word?" I asked. "Bunker?" "He said it as a joke," she said quickly. "He said Tom loved hiding in radio rooms and that he probably left us—" She stopped because she had said more than she meant to. "Left you things," she corrected. I felt betrayed and simultaneously protective, like a dog that wants to bite and lick a hand at the same time. I looked at Dana because she was safe to look at when I was trying to set my face like a woman who was only surprised and not simultaneously afraid and annoyed. "I didn't know Tom had a stepson," Dana said. "That's not my business. I'm just observing like a scientist. It was a long time ago. He was married very young and they were a mess. He didn't hide it from me. He thought Caleb would be better off with his mother, and he didn't fight the fights he didn't know how to win yet. He always thought he'd fix it later when he had money and maturity, and then, as men do, he confused time with fate. He wants to meet, Maya said, today, at the diner. Then we'll meet him, I said, and braced for the part where she would accuse me of being controlling. She didn't. She was still in the phase where grief had not yet rearranged her logic into stubbornness. She looked relieved that I had said yes before she had to ask. Do it at a table with a good line of sight to both doors, Dana said matter-of-factly. I'll go to the office and start a file. I'll also tell B. Muir that you're sleeping in the tower so she doesn't drop by with a casserole. Because if she does, you will find yourself the custodian of 3 pot roasts and half the town's opinions. We already are, I said, and we both smiled. And then we were serious again because you have to be a little amused to survive in America and more than a little sober to survive in a town. We met Caleb at noon in a diner with a big window that looked across the harbor where the lobster boats sat low in the water like good dogs. He was taller than I remembered from the one photograph Tom kept in the bottom drawer of his workbench. He had filled out in the neck and shoulders in the way men do when they lift things for a living. He wore nice boots and a jacket that had seen real weather and not just store displays. He stood when we walked in and made the mistake of hugging me quickly as if we had a history that included such gestures. I hugged him back because I am not a monster and because he was a child once, and no one is only the sum of their worst idea. You look good, he said to Maya and fumbled his napkin. You look like me, she said, rescuing him. We ordered coffee and pancakes because there is something about eating pancakes in the middle of the day that feels like borrowing a better childhood. He reached for the syrup with a hand that trembled slightly. I watched him and thought, you are not all calculation. You are scared for reasons that might not all be petty. The thought softened me and I didn't want it to. It's easier to fight a cartoon. I didn't know about the funeral, he said. He had his father's habit of looking at the sugar packets while he spoke, as if the words might be printed there. My mother thought I knew, and I thought she would tell me if she did. I should have asked. I'm sorry. I'm not in a place where that apology matters, I said, not unkindly. You could have done a dozen things and didn't. Now you are here. He nodded and took the blow and did not try to argue it down into a smaller pain. I respected that. He set a folder on the table and slid out 3 sheets, a projection of municipal revenue with and without Orion Net's arrival, a glassy mock-up of a shoreline promenade that looked like a catalog's idea of a summer evening, a letter of intent with 3 signature lines. I've been doing survey work on contract for Cranmore, he said, and didn't blink at the way I turned my head at the word. The money's regular. My crew gets health care. If I could get a permanent slot when the shore station goes live. He stopped, as if he had heard himself say more about desire than he meant to reveal. He tried again. This isn't only good for me. The deal is better if the town can deliver a landing without litigation. The deal is better for the men who get paid to land the cable. The deal might be better for the town if the town acts like it can count to 10 in sequence without skipping the numbers that feel inconvenient. It's a chance for us to work together, Evelyn, he said, and I noticed that he did not call me anything else. Maya and I would like to make it less us and them. Us is a word people use when they want an advantage they have not earned yet, I said, and let my voice be warmer than the sentence's edge. I am not telling you to leave. I am telling you I will not sign anything in a diner because there is a schedule in someone else's calendar. Lookedly, if Tom intended to engineer something from beyond the grave, he did not do it because he wanted OrionNet to land on time. He did it because he believed I am smarter and slower than the men who want to get a thing done by Friday. Do not ask me to prove him wrong so you can feel better in your boots. He blinked and looked at Maya and then at his coffee. He folded the letter of intent and unfolded it and folded it again. He put it in his pocket as if he were a magician and could make paper into obedience. "I want to be part of the family," he said softly. "He was my father for a little while." He was more of a rumor than a man after, I admit it. I'm not pretending it was something it wasn't, but he was a rumor I needed. If there is any world in which that rumor becomes a story we can share, I want to try to live in that world. I felt my face change. When a person in the back of an ambulance tells you they are in pain, you make a guess about the percentage of pain that the sentence contains. The rest you find by looking at their eyebrows and their fingers and their knees. I believed 40% of what he said, and 40% of that belief made me angry at myself. He pulled a small card from his wallet and slid it across to me. It was a QSL card, the postcard hams send each other to confirm they made contact. Tom's call sign was on the left. A child's shaky block letters were on the right. "Cal," I read aloud, because saying a name makes it a person. K1CAL. He smiled with his lips pressed shut as if to hold in something that wanted to climb out. I was 9. He let me hold the mic and taught me about bouncing signals off the ionosphere. It felt like magic. After he left, I stopped doing it because it hurt to think about a room that had his voice in it and no body. "Everything hurts right now," Maya said to him, "without forgiveness and without meanness. It won't stop because we sign a line. It might stop if we tell the truth long enough to be tired of lying." We paid and drove back to the lighthouse. The sky had found its gray again. The waves had not tired. Dana texted to say that she had spoken to a friend at the Attorney General's environmental unit and that it would not hurt us to gather more without telling anyone we were gathering. B. Muir left a tin of molasses cookies on the step with the note that read, "Top shelf in the lens room, do not break your neck." And I smiled because that was exactly the kind of advice that makes me feel loved. Tom's second tin was not on the top shelf. It was under the base of the old fog bell, which someone had set in the yard as if it were a memorial. The tag on tin 2 read simply, "Low tide." We waited. We drank too much coffee and we argued quietly in the way that people who love each other argue when they are so tired that the bones of their heads ache. Maya fell asleep on the cot with her phone loose in her hand. I watched the water crawl down the rocks and expose the slick apron of kelp that the sea tries to keep to itself, the muscle-bound mussels, the barnacles with their stubborn eyelids. There is a satisfaction to low tide that even my grief could not make ugly. The bell was heavy. Maya woke and helped me rock it easily, the way you learn to move big things when they do not want to break you. On the third swing, it made no sound, which is how I knew there was something inside. I looked at Maya and we grinned like thieves. Underneath, taped to the wooden braces, was tin 2. I pried it open and found a cassette, a folded diagram of the lantern room, and a typed page with 3 lines. "Walk above, not below. Light is lighter than you think. Listen to me from the ladder." I climbed to the lantern room. The big gear that once rotated the lens was still there, handsome and useless. The hatch to the catwalk was a weight in my hand. I could feel the sea in the hinge. I set the cassette in the player and let my breath settle. Because we ruin so many moments by hurrying into them. "If you're in the lantern room," he said, "look down at the iron grate where your left foot is. There's a panel with 3 screws that are older than the war. A man named McLeish scratched his initials on them in 1943. The 3rd screw is stripped. Don't fight it. You won't need to. If you lift the grate at the corner, the whole panel will come up like truth when you finally stop arguing with yourself about it. Under the panel is the shaft for the old weight. At the bottom of the shaft, there's a door. You cannot get to the door without a ladder and a strong back. I know you're strongest where it matters, and people always misunderstood which part that was. You will want to go down. Don't yet. Wait for the storm. The door works better when it wants the same thing you want." He sighed softly, the way he did when a thought came back to his hands after a day away. "You're doing more than I have any right to ask. If you want to stop, stop. Nothing bad will happen that would not have happened anyway. I didn't put a bomb in your life. I built you a room where the part of you that sees patterns might sit and have a sandwich without being interrupted by the part of life that always insists on doing dishes." I replaced the grate and sat with my back against the iron column and looked out over the harbor, where a single gull sat on the stern rail of a boat like a critic who finds your art competent and would like another drink. Maya came up and sat down cross-legged and leaned her head on my shoulder. We had not done that since she was 12. I wrapped her hand in mine and did not comment. The storm that Tom wanted arrived 2 days later, a nor'easter done in the old style, the kind that makes the world feel smaller and truer. The sky went the color of dull pewter and stayed that way. The wind blew from points that the charts don't draw. The air felt like it could hold you up or throw you inside your own body. The town sent an alert about possible power outages and urged us to prepare. I made soup because I am a woman, and this is what we do when the sky threatens to remove us. Dana texted from a NOAA truck and said to sit tight. Bea called to confirm that the shingles on her porch roof were going to behave. I told her to tie them if she needed to, and we both laughed like schoolgirls who knew the rules and broke them when it mattered. The knock came in the afternoon, exactly when I had begun to hope that the wind would run them off. "Emergency inspection," Rory announced when we opened the door. He wore a Barber coat and held a folder with an orange sticker that made it look like the kind of paper that outruns common sense. "Given the conditions, the town needs to make sure we don't have a hazard. I'm sorry to inconvenience you." "Is the hazard the light or the men who think they can write the weather?" I asked. "We are fine." He gestured. Cranmore's 2 polite faces stood behind him, hoods up, eyes professional. "Of course," he said. "We'll be quick. Just the base and the generator room." "What a coincidence," I said. "If we go to the generator room, we can go together." Maya hovered at my shoulder. She had slept badly and looked like a person who might be willing to throw a punch and apologize in the same motion. Caleb was not there. Good. I did not want to map the complications he would have brought with him. "I don't want to fight you for the sake of theater," Rory said, as if my life were a stage he liked to think he had designed. "Let's be practical." "I am being," I said, "and if your paper is honest, you can leave it here and let the storm do its job without my staircase in the way." He weighed the options behind his eyes and nodded. "Very well," he said, and slid the orange folder inside the door where it rested like a pretty insect that might bite. When they left, I went immediately to the lantern room. The grate felt sympathetic in my hands. The stripped screw came up with a little prayer and a little oil. The opening beneath was a square mouth 7 feet deep that widened into darkness where the old weight had once passed. I clipped a carabiner to the ladder and breathed the way I taught patients and new EMTs and my daughter and strangers and grocery stores during panic attacks, then stared down into something that was exactly itself. Maya went down first because she is young and brave, and because when she is afraid, she wants to do the thing that frightens her so that she can pierce it and wear its skin. I followed and felt the air change from sea to basement. That old sweet smell of steel and paint and time. The door at the bottom of the shaft was exactly where he had promised. It had a wheel. I put my hands on the spokes and thought about every submarine movie I ever watched, beside Tom, while we made fun of small inaccuracies that no one else cared about. The wheel moved, The doors sighed the way old doors sigh when they have not had a hand on them in years and suddenly remember their job is to accommodate human beings. The space beyond was a small room, bigger than a closet, smaller than a hotel room, with a low ceiling and equipment bolted to every wall. Radio slept there. Sets with dials whose faces made me nostalgic for a past I'd not lived. A table in the middle held 3 that still had power lights. Off to one side, carefully labeled, sat 10s, 10-3, 10-4, 10-5. Maya laughed and clapped her hands like a kid who has been taken to a library with a secret second floor. "He built you a bunker," she said. "You hated that word." "I still do," I said. "This is not a bunker. It's a listening room."
"You're happier," she said quietly. "I can hear it in your voice even when your face thinks it's not safe to show it." "I am occupied," I said, and we both knew that was a kind of happiness that grief allows you without guilt. We opened 10-3. It carried a schematic of the shoreline with circles drawn in pencil where the high water mark had been recorded over 50 years by a man whose notes were so careful they made me feel greedy. The cassette was only Tom's voice saying names and dates and coordinates in a tone that carried no drama at all. If you need to prove anything to anyone, you need something that is not your outrage or their impatience. These are the somethings. Dana knows what to do with them. You can trust her with this and with a key to the house because she doesn't take keys. She accepts responsibilities. We opened 10-4. It carried a photograph of a stack of letters between Rory and a lawyer whose return address was on a firm in Portland that had adopted the tone of lawyers who don't believe a person like me will read all the way to the bottom. The letters were copies from a file that no one thought had duplicates. "How did he get these?" Maya asked as we sat with our backs against opposite walls and our legs stuck out to hold the room between us. "He knew where leak points are," I said. "He was a plumber for signals." 10-5 was heavier. The cassette was longer. When I pressed play, I could hear his breath and the small hum of a plastic fan and the far complaint of something that wanted to be oiled. He did not apologize now, not in the way he did on the first tape. He told a story about being 22 and about being in charge of a log that no one cared about until it mattered. He said a name of a young seaman who had gotten into an altercation in a port bar and had thrown a punch that barely landed. He said he had changed the time mark on a maintenance sheet to give that kid an alibi because he was stupid, but the kind of stupid that comes from being poor and tired and lonely. "I falsified a thing," he said. "It was small, and I am telling you because I have to. When you look at the other papers, the ones about Rory and Oriah Nett, I don't want you to think that I lived my life on a purity hill. I am a plumber. I know where leak points are because I made one. I made one and I regretted it for longer than I keep secrets. That kid made good. He left the service and wrote me 5 years later to say he had stayed sober for 3 and thanked me because he had not gotten kicked out for the bar fight. I kept the letter. It made me mad to realize that sometimes doing the wrong thing like that gives the right results. I am telling you this so that you do not think the world is simple when you make your choice. Also, I know you will think less of me, and I am still a little vain even now. Sit with that and figure out if it matters." I set my forehead on the metal and took a breath that felt like it would break my ribs and did not, and I forgave him in exactly the way he asked to be forgiven, which is to say, not as a saint and not as a judge, but as a woman who had handed him cups of coffee and read his notes and made him eat a piece of fruit on days when he would have preferred not to. The day of the hearing was not a day I would have chosen. The storm crusted in the afternoon. Power flickered in the morning and went out at 4.
The town, which has always trusted candles and boots more than it trusts state agencies, transferred the emergency meeting from the town hall, dark, to the lighthouse, dark but friendly to alternate power. It was not a public hearing in the formal sense. It was a gathering of tempers trying to appear reasonable. Dana arrived with a portable screen and a case of batteries. Bea appeared with a thermos of something that made my eyes water, in a good way. Cranmore's polite faces were polite. Rory came with a look that suggested he had not slept, and with a man I did not know whose suit looked like the kind of suit that believes in itself while still resenting the weather. "We'll get through this quickly," Rory said, handing out flashlights in a way that made him look like a man who had invented the idea of community. "Then we'll let the professionals handle the coastal risk assessment and we'll continue on our scheduled track." "You can make a track on paper," Dana said under her breath to me, "and the ocean will take a pencil and move it somewhere else." We descended to the old generator room. The modern machines hummed on cue when I opened the fuel valve and pressed the black button. The light came up in a soft way that made the room feel honest. We arranged chairs in a circle in the round room so that people could pretend we were neighbors. Orion Net's man set up his laptop and a battery-run projector and put up slides of where the cable would run and how the channel would be dredged and what would happen to the intertidal zone. His voice was calm. He had done this often. "We can run the drag line here," he said, pointing at the southern approach. "We'll compensate the town for the temporary inconvenience and you will disrupt the movement of sand," Dana said in the tone of someone asking why a patient was bleeding from a wound we could not see when the evidence suggested the artery we had missed. "You will change the beach and pretend it was always like that." "We've modeled the outcomes," he said. "Our models are conservative." "The last time a model says that in a room like this," Bea whispered to me, "someone loses a house." Maya sat with her hands around a thermos as if it could be the thing that kept her from saying something she would regret. Caleb came late, dripping, no jacket, eyes raw like a man who had just finished arguing and lost. He sat on the edge of a chair, his knees splayed the way men sit when they don't know how to fold their legs into humility. "If we can confirm your easement," Rory said, "we can move this along in a way that will make everyone feel heard and satisfied." "The town map," Dana said, clicking to a slide she had made, "does not match the states. We can't move anything along on pretend paper." "It's a different resolution," Rory said with that reasonable tone that makes your cheeks hurt because you are clenching your jaw to keep from swearing in front of your neighbors. "It's a different line," I said. "You drew a new line on top of an old truth. That's not resolution. That's cheating at the level of a child with a crayon." "We can litigate definitions," the Orion man said smoothly. "Or we can turn on the light," I said. "You can make a track on paper," Dana said under her breath to me, "and the ocean will take a pencil and move it somewhere else." We descended to the old generator room. The modern machines hummed on cue when I opened the fuel valve and pressed the black button. The light came up in a soft way that made the room feel honest. We arranged chairs in a circle in the round room so that people could pretend we were neighbors. Orion Net's man set up his laptop and a battery-run projector and put up slides of where the cable would run and how the channel would be dredged and what would happen to the intertidal zone. His voice was calm. He had done this often. "We can run the drag line here," he said, pointing at the southern approach. We'll compensate the town for the temporary inconvenience, and you will disrupt the movement of sand, Dana said in the tone of someone asking why a patient was bleeding from a wound we could not see when the evidence suggested the artery we had missed. You will change the beach and pretend it was always like that. We've modeled the outcomes, he said. Our models are conservative. The last time a model says that in a room like this, Bea whispered to me, someone loses a house. Maya sat with her hands around a thermos as if it could be the thing that kept her from saying something she would regret. Caleb came late, dripping, no jacket, eyes raw like a man who had just finished arguing and lost. He sat on the edge of a chair, his knees splayed the way men sit when they don't know how to fold their legs into humility. If we can confirm your easement, Rory said, we can move this along in a way that will make everyone feel heard and satisfied. The town map, Dana said, clicking to a slide she had made, does not match the state's. We can't move anything along on pretend paper. It's a different resolution, Rory said with that reasonable tone that makes your cheeks hurt because you are clenching your jaw to keep from swearing in front of your neighbors. It's a different line, I said. You drew a new line on top of an old truth. That's not resolution. That's cheating at the level of a child with a crayon. We can litigate definitions, the Orion man said smoothly. Or we can turn on the light, I said. I went to the base of the lantern room and walked the stairs with my heart beating not like a rabbit, but like a drumline. At the top, I stood for a second with my hand on the knife switch that Tom had laughed about on the first tape, because the truth is, engineers like big switches. I wanted to say a prayer. I settled for a sentence I had used in ambulances and kitchens and moving trucks and delivery rooms and quiet rooms with people who were leaving their bodies by stages. Let the next right thing be visible. When I threw the switch, the generator accepted the work and the lens filled with a living glow. The light rotated slowly at first, then with the old confidence of an athlete who has practiced for half a lifetime and just needs some oil. The beam touched water through rain and pain, and minutes later, when we all took a breath again, I turned to the old radio console in the room beneath and flipped the power on the emergency beacon that old Coast Guard men had left there like a joke. Tom had set the cassette deck to another switch. I pressed play. His voice came out of the speaker like memory, and out of the small handhelds that the volunteers had brought, and out of the cheap portable radios that sit in 1,000 kitchens in town, and out of the cabs of 100 trucks. If you're hearing me, he said, it means the storm turned the volume down on the men who like to talk loud. I do not say that as an insult. I say it because I would have been one of them if I had not had to learn how to make machines whisper first. This is not a ghost warning. This is a man telling you what he saw. In the folder under the lantern ladder, there is a paper that you will be tempted to put at the back. Start with that one. It lists dates on which the select board met without a quorum but acted anyway. That doesn't make you a villain. It makes you tired and wrong. The other paper is a set of overlays that will show you what the furnished map looked like when the contractor drew a line not with survey instruments but with ambition. If you are the contractor, do not be ashamed. Ambition survives hurricanes and 10th grade. It will survive this. The thing you have to decide is whether you want to do your work in the light or in the places in a lighthouse where no one goes because it's damp and smells like old rope. Rory stood with his hand on the back of a chair, eyes more open than he wanted them to be. He had not expected the voice. The Orion man looked interested and a little angry, the way surgeons look when an emergency interrupts their scheduled procedures.
Dana had the overlay on the screen in seconds, her fingers already typing an email to the AG's office, to the Coastal Commission, to the kind of people who do have the power to replace men like Rory if they refuse to replace their habits. The tape continued calmly. You will be tempted to think that the person on the other side of the table from you is your enemy, Tom said. You will be tempted to sign something because you are tired. You will be tempted to throw papers and say big words like injunction and prosecution and public trust. Those words might be exactly what is needed later. Before you make them the whole of your mouth, decide whether there is a version of the future that is not about winning at the expense of everybody's grandmother and the one place she thought would always be where she left it. There are two kinds of money, the kind you can put a number on and the kind you cannot. When we pretend the second kind isn't real, we lose things that make us forget what the first kind is for. I looked at Caleb. He was bent over like he had been hit in the stomach and was trying not to make a noise that other people could hear. He reached in his pocket and pulled out the QSL card again and held it like a photograph you don't want to smudge. You don't have to be the bad guy, Maya said to him, quietly, without pity. You can be the other sort of guy. You can be the one who says he was wrong and then does something different. Not a speech, a thing. He laughed without humor. You sound like him. Mom sounds like her version of him, she said. I sound like me. Figure out who you sound like before you are a voice at the end of a tape. He stood. His knees wobbled. He took a step toward Rory and then another and then did what I did not expect him to do. He turned toward the Orion man. I can confirm the shoreline line is wrong, he said, not because I am an expert, but because I walked it with a meter and a tide chart last month, and the numbers don't match. We adjusted them because the boss said that was how you get the line we wanted for the drawing. That is how he put it. I am making that confession now because I do not know how to live if I don't. The Orion man made a face like a man biting a lemon he did not order. We will, of course, review. You will. You will review with your lawyers and with ours, and you will use the state map and the tide and the 15 years of honest water be as has been recorded. You will establish baseline monitoring that covers the beach and the cove. You will pay for an endowment for the lighthouse that will keep it standing and bright without making the town sell a child to afford a second lamp. You will write into the agreement that there is a promenade and it will be maintained. You will choose a landing that does not require dynamite on a cliff you admire. She looked around and smiled at the absurdity of a scientist using that word. And you will put the light in the first paragraph as the thing that must be respected even if your shareholders are bored. I am a civil servant and I have learned that the only way to get what is right is to write it. You have no authority to, the Orion man started. I have authority to advise a woman who owns a property you want, Dana said. I have authority to speak in a storm when the land is making arguments none of us can interrupt. She has the rest. They all looked at me as if I was the last piece in a machine that was only a machine until a hand gave it purpose. I stood with my back to the stone I had already trusted with my sleep. The beam made its slow, starched rounds. Here is what I want, I said. I want to keep the light working and the door open. I want to be able to bring my granddaughter back here someday and tell her that her grandfather gave me a mystery instead of a burden. I want the walkway that is in your nice brochure, but with boards that don't splinter and railings that don't rust. I want a scholarship at the vocational high school for a kid who wants to learn three-dimensional truth with their hands. I want the cables to land where they do the least violence, and I want the town to put aside its hunger for small praise in exchange for a chance to be an example other towns can copy without lying to themselves about what they lost.
I want to hire the people who live here to do the work that keeps us honest. I want a fund that I do not have to beg for to repair the things that Salt loves too much. I want everyone to have to say the word public trust out loud at the beginning of every meeting until it becomes a habit to be faithful. You will ruin the schedule, the Orion man said, which I chose to hear as Why the Sun Rises. The schedule was never mine, I said. The light is. Rory set his hand on the back of a chair. He had aged in the last half hour. His voice had none of the sleekness that had made me angry. It was the voice of a man who had arrived at a moment he had promised himself he would never have to live. He looked at the paper in my hand without looking at my hand and said quietly, "If I do this with you, my friends will decide to be my enemies. If you don't," B said, from the back of the room she had made her own with the authority of a woman who had outlived 3 chairmen and 4 budgets, "you will have new friends who do not visit when you get old." "That is so unfair," he said to her, and for a second he smiled in a way that made me like him for the first time. "Do the work, then we'll see what is fair." By the time the generator hiccuped, we had terms. Not a contract, terms. The difference matters. Dana had typed them into a document I could read on a screen with my finger under the line. The Orion man had not signed. Men like him never sign until their lawyers eat the document and spit it back out in phrases that make your eyes glaze. But he had nodded in the way that meant he had committed himself to a set of expectations and would have to invent a new word if he wanted to get out of them later. Rory had not signed either. He had put his hand flat on the table and pressed it there as if it belonged to a person he hoped to trust. When the room emptied, we climbed to the lantern to breathe air that had not been exhaled by other people. The beam turned. The sea worked on the rocks the way it has since the beginning. I stood with my palm flat on the glass the way you do on a window when someone you love is on the other side and you want to pretend there is only a thickness of the same substance between you. Maya leaned her head on my shoulder. I could feel her apology without her saying it, and I accepted it without telling her she needed to say it. Caleb hovered near the door. "I hate that I liked it when he called me son," he said. He looked very tired. "I hate that I hated him for not teaching me how to fix a lantern and then had the nerve to feel proud when he fixed one for you. Pride is not a straight line. It's a loop. You can jump on at any point and ride it to a place where it won't shame you." He held the QSL card out to me. He gave me this, and then the world rearranged our family tree without asking me if I liked how it looked. He wrote the date on the back in ink that bled. I don't want to keep this if it makes me into a person who tells himself stories he can't live inside without hurting people. I want to keep it if it makes me do the thing I did tonight on purpose again. "Keep it," I said. "Put it in a frame with a picture of yourself doing something you're proud of that has nothing to do with him. When you talk about it later, talk about the thing you did more than the thing he made you feel." "He left more tapes," Maya told him. "He left tins. You don't get to open them with us because you'll make fun, whereas we will weep and be dramatic. But you can sit at the bottom of the stairs and hear the bits that matter. No promises of closeness, just a chair in the same room." He smiled in a way that made me think he might know how to be set free and stick around anyway. A week later, when the storm had washed itself out and the Orion lawyers had finished their first dance and the AG's office had asked for copies and then more copies and then asked Dana to please show up for a meeting with her hair in the same bun because it made them think of discipline, I found 10-7. He had left it in a place that made me think he knew I was sentimental and that he indulged me more than was healthy. There is a bench in the lantern room where the light catches an hour before sunset in the winter and makes the boards glow the color of honey and a jar on a kitchen windowsill. Under that bench was the tin, taped to the underside with a note in his block letters. For the day you are ready to paint again. I opened it sitting cross-legged, with my knees popping like a woman who has run stairs for 25 years and has a right to feel her joints. Inside was a canvas board, a small one, the size of a school notebook. On the back, he had written in the letters he kept only for me when he was not trying to impress paperwork. The lantern understands that a beam can be a color you cannot name. The tape said only one thing. "Put me away," his voice said. "And then, when you can't stand it anymore, take me out and make a thing that isn't a story about me." I put him away for 2 days, and then I took him out. I carried the board and a little tin of Prussian blue and titanium white from a set I had brought from Maya when she was 12 and decided to paint whales and then decided to text boys about their shoes instead. I sat on the floor because my body likes the floor and because chairs felt too formal for the first thing. I did not paint the light. I painted the line of foam where the wave that day almost made it to the Bell Foundation and then gave up. It looked like the edge of a dress on a girl running home. When it dried, I hated it. And then I loved it. And then I realized that I was allowed to use both words for the same 10 square inches of life without asking someone for permission. I watched the light. I learned the names of the screws in the lens frame. I kept a log. I wrote down the tide at noon and whether the gulls sat on the rail as if they owned it. I answered phone calls, and I did not answer others. I called my mother because she will die someday, and I will be sorry that I chose not to have a voice when I could have had it. I made soup and took muffins to Bea and let her show me where her porch leaked and watched her teach me how to fix it without letting me feel useless. I picked up grit from the floor, and the grit was the same color as the grit that had been in my grandfather's workshop 50 years ago in a different town with a different winter, and I felt time turn into something I could hold. I wanted to miss him in a way that allowed me to also love the day I was living. And on mornings when I woke with a fist around my lungs, I told myself the same sentence I had told 100 patients and 3 friends and my husband once when he had thought his heart was failing because a stranger at a health fair made him wear a cuff that pinched. "You are not dying. You are scared." If I was also dying, I would get there when fate and the fact of my body said I would.
Orion Net signed the covenant. The word makes it sound prettier than a contract, and I suppose that on some days it is. It enforced what we had said out loud in the old stone room. It put numbers on promises you can't always count. The landing moved south by 30 yards and down by a few feet, where the rock was less eager to throw the sea back. The town got its walkway and its monitoring plan. A trust funded by the company, controlled by a board that included people who knew where the money should go because they knew how iron rusts and how ropes rot, was born out of the stubbornness of a widow who refused to sign because a clever man told her to in a diner. Rory was voted out of his seat that spring because virtue punishes quickly sometimes. But he remained on the planning commission 2 years later because memory forgives slowly, and he had been helpful after. And dignity sometimes looks like telling a man he can bring the coffee and the minutes to a meeting, but cannot sit at the head of the table anymore. Caleb left Cranmore. He started his own small outfit that measured honest things for people who didn't want to be embarrassed at town meetings. He stopped calling me Evelyn and started calling me the name his father used when he wanted to be scolded and kissed in the same minute. I let him because he had earned it. Maya applied for a grant to make a workshop in the base of the tower where children could learn how to solder a wire and how to listen to a frequency that does not belong to the radio by itself. On a bright morning in May, when the air had that fresh-cut grass smell, even where there was only rock and salt, I carried the cassette deck to the catwalk and set it where the first one had sat and hit record. It felt like a ritual in reverse. I had nothing new to tell the sea that it had not already thrown at me in rain and foam, and nothing to say to Tom that I had not already said in a prayer I do not know the words for. I spoke anyway. "If you're hearing me," I said, "it means you found your way to the light without a map. Good job. This is Bracken Point Station. If it's foggy, we will tell you where the rocks are. If it's clear, we will ask you about the color of the water. If you are worried that you will not make it to shore, we will find out how to make the shore come to you. The light is on, even if the sun is not. The beam is not ours, it is yours. Take what you need and leave the rest for the next boat." I stopped the tape and smiled then, and the smile felt like those first weeks after we moved from Seattle to Maine, when the light at 4 in the afternoon made the kitchen look like a photograph of itself. I carried the recorder down the stairs and set it in the listening room and left it there, where strangers who become friends could find it and laugh at the way my voice sounds more cheerful than I meant it to, less dignified than I deserve, exactly like a woman who was not finished after all. 2 months after the covenant, Beatrice knocked on the gate and waved me down the path. I walked toward her.
"You have a visitor," she said. "He looks like a man who knows what pain is and decided not to use it as an excuse." Marcus stood at the edge of the path. He was thinner. He carried his hat in his hand, the way men of his generation do when they want you to know they aren't asking to be invited inside for anything fancy. He said he had come to apologize for the way he had behaved, and that he was sorry for the way men like him use the same words too late and expect medals. "You don't get a medal for not being a fool twice," I said. He nodded and said that he had found a photograph in his father's drawer and that it had my husband in it with a plant that looked like the kind of plant rich people buy when they marry their second husband. I took the photo and laughed. An orchid in a boy's hands, the ridiculous elegance of it in a yard full of rusted cars. "You can come see the lens," I said to him gently. "You cannot come eat my soup yet. There are steps, and then there are steps." We climbed. He stood in the lantern room and removed his hat, and I forgave him less than he wanted and more than I owed him. That is what passes for grace in places like this. He cried once. One small thing that made him look like a boy who had lost something he had assumed never to be returned to him. I did not comfort him. The light did that.
The last tape in the last 10 was dated for a year after the first. It waited until I was ready. And I only knew I was ready because the day came and I didn't feel like a person who was inside a glass room watching other people eat. I pressed play and listened to him say goodbye. "This isn't a trick," he said, and I laughed because he was making fun of himself and of me and of the way we built our life, as if humor was always the one safe place in weather. "This is me telling you that there's no more scheduled programming. If you need a voice after this, you'll find 10 on the same frequency because you have always known how to find a help frequency in a crowded channel. I left you a light and a room and a set of laws you now know like the names of your own fingers. And I left you in a place that will not tolerate lies for long because the wind makes everyone honest faster than church ever could. Use them. Use the light. Use the room. Use your mind.
Use the people who deserve it and who feed you back something other than their appetite. If you're lonely, don't make a habit out of it. If you're happy, don't apologize for it. If you have to cry, do it in the lantern and then make a sandwich and eat it with butter in a shameful amount.
He breathed. I breathed with him. We made the same noise at the same time, like a couple who have done this enough to anticipate the timing. I loved you every day, not because I am the kind of man who says that sort of thing lightly, but because the way you stacked the plates near the sink made me want to live long enough to see whether there is a correct way to do it. There isn't. That was the joke. You were the punchline and the setup. The tape clicked and the fan whirred and my heart beat and the sea pushed on the rock and there was no more scheduled programming and I was alive in a tower that had decided to be my house. Summer taught me the names of the goals, which are mostly insults when you learn them from men who fish and love anyway. Fall taught me the way the light can make the grass look like it is thinking. Winter taught me to put plastic over the windows when the drafts are a lesson I don't need to learn again that year. Spring taught me what kind of birds most people only see in pictures. It also taught me which men are not to be trusted when they say the word timeline.
When Orion Net broke ground for the inland station, the first shovel did not turn until the monitoring posts were in place and the high tide markers were moved from the made-up line to the honest one. Boys on bikes sat on the new promenade with their legs stuck out and asked questions that surprised men in suits. Girls in muddy boots made drawings with chalk on the boards. The trust board met in the round room once a month for the joy of saying wise things in a pretty place. I took my coffee out on the catwalk and drank it with the gulls. Sometimes I thought of the life where I would have moved south, sold the light, given my daughter cash she did not ask for, and spent the next 10 years pretending not to regret it. I felt grateful I did not live that life. When the urge came to make my own broadcast again, I did not fight it. I set the deck on the catwalk and pressed record and said the sentence that the light deserved for its own.
This is Bracken Point, I said. We keep a light. If you need it, it's yours. If you don't, take comfort in knowing it's there. Somebody is always on watch. I stopped and I looked out over the ocean toward a country I would never see, but which felt as near as breath when the air was honest. And I held the railing not because I was afraid of falling, but because I wanted to feel something that would resist me and keep me in place. Then I went downstairs and made soup, because grief and joy both make me hungry. And there is a town hungry for the kind of food a woman with a lighthouse knows how to make. On some nights, I walk the spiral stairs with my hand on the rail and feel how many hands have shaped 50 years of salt into a smoothness that is both comfort and warning. I reach the lantern room and I stand for a minute and listen, not for a voice in the tape, not for a trick, but for the wind walking its dog on the water. If you stay quiet long enough, you can hear the moment the light takes the duty from the day and makes the decisions that only light can make. And once in a while, when fog creeps in on cat feet and sits like a cat with a secret, I think I hear him clear a throat, and I say, "No more scheduled programming," and I laugh, and I do the work anyway. Because that was always our secret. We did not need the other person in the room to do the work we promised we'd do when we were young. We did it because of each other. We do it still.